Salutations to all my utopians, Global here, live from Global Utopia Sports. And I wanted to talk post NFL draft about a very interesting dynamic that we just are now witnessing. I was listening to Gilbert Arenas today on his podcast, and he was talking about draft picks and the dynamic that's changing in terms of how leagues are going about, the NBA is going about discovering their talents now for the league, prospects in the league, excuse me. And it's an interesting shift how they were talking about, now it's the international game and second round draft pick, especially with the collective bargaining agreement, and how the collegiate level game is. And even though the NIL deal is very intriguing, it's too little, too late. And because where does a player have time to build a brand to really exploit that opportunity? You might as well go overseas, like Emmanuel Mudiay tried to trailblaze that campaign, along with the more notable Lonzo Ball. There's a couple players. I think Brandon Jennings did that as well, where players go overseas rather than waste their time in the NBA, waste their time in the collegiate level. And as the conversation continued to progress, there was this discussion about Kwame Brown getting drafted and Charles Barkley criticizing Michael Jordan, and it was on a Vlad TV interview, and he was basically talking about uh, why NBA athletes get so the difference between NBA athletes taking offense from criticism and how they take criticism, right? And if it's factual, it doesn't sting as much. They say they just want to make sure that when you're making comments about them, it's not biased. And Charles Barkley criticizing Michael Jordan and it being in direct result of their fallout, because he mentioned Kwame Brown getting drafted first overall, and look at the picks 2, 3, 4 after him until Gasol was drafted was virtually not bust. Like, for instance, Tyson Chandler by no means is a bust. It started off a little slow, but he never evolved into a superstar. Now, should every team that's ever been in the league not use a Tyson Chandler? Absolutely. He has value on any team that he plays for. But this notion that Michael did such a terrible thing drafting Kwame Brown, who I feel like if you're in the league for 10 years, you did something right. And so basically the discussion shifted to the pressures of feeling the need to the draft becoming its own event, and it's just its own event in virtue the same as like the playoffs, the regular season. The draft has its own identity, and then obviously the NBA finals, you got all-star games. It's its own world. And so because of that being its own world, it has a monstrous hype machine behind it. And with hype comes the need for a speculative headline that can grab the novice viewer's attention. And so players like Kwame, what happens with Kwame happens every time, where you start flooding these players with this with these expectations, and if they don't live up to those expectations, suddenly they're deemed a complete failure. Kind of like what Giannis was talking about when they asked him about this season, was it a failure, things like that. Expectations obviously is crazy in life. It can cause a lot of passionate and sometimes irrational problems. And so I thought immediately about Brad Holmes and his draft. He even knew before the draft. He's seen what the pundits like Mel Kiper and Todd McShay were projecting certain prospects to go on the draft board. And unfortunately, what that does is, since that's all the fans have to look at, it creates this level of expectation and hype that GMs and presidents now have to live up to. And they may have their own ideas of who actually is the legitimate, real deal Holyfield in the first, second round, third round. But since these fans are the consumers, they're the ones, since they are the ones who drive the actual end of the day, the end of the means to an end, the dollar, the almighty dollar, that's what makes the league relevant at the end of the day, are the fans. Teams, it forces GMs to be on a hot seat. Maybe they draft someone they didn't want. Case in point, Kyle Shanahan, who I consider to be Mike Shanahan, who I consider to be the diamond standard of NFL coaches, and just the name Shanahan in and of itself is royalty, NFL royalty. going RG3 when maybe that wasn't their ideal fit, or Jeff Fisher having to go draft Vince Young because of obviously coming off that amazing game against USC, one of the greatest performances in all of sports. So here you have this guy Brad Holmes coming off an electric year. Started off slow, but the team caught a lot of fire, became America's darling, courtesy of Hard Knocks. In fact, we're even this offseason asked to repeat the series. And Brad Holmes says, he's wearing t-shirts stating villains. By the way, this is my Learning or Earning t-shirt. You can get it on globalutopia.org for those who are wondering. This is one of our more affordable t-shirts. And so Brad Holmes is asked about, Brad Holmes is wearing the villain t-shirt in the press conference, and they're asking him, hey, what's the meaning behind the t-shirt? And he's like, well, what you guys think is going on and who we're actually viewing as intriguing prospects and matching what we're actually doing here in the mindset and the mentality are two different things. So brace yourselves, because if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you're going to be hit with a whirlwind of disappointment. And so come draft night, he takes Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama, a Nick Saban product, who we all know he's the godfather of college football, and he's considered football royalty. And he's coming from that Alabama program, regardless of the history at running back. And immediately people are like, what? And for him, it was an on-the-fly move. When you're as a GM, obviously you're trained differently, you're molded differently. It's kind of similar to what you would consider the stock market, where some news drops, and next thing you know, everyone is shuffling one way or the other. Most of the time, it's a sell thing, right? Of any kind of announcements will cause, buy on the rumor, sell on the news type thing. So, out of Penn State, the running back Robinson goes to Atlanta, and it's like, whoa, he was projected around 20 on the big boards, according to the Mel Kipers and the Todd McShays. And now he's going 6, I think it was, overall. And immediately it was a panic, because you were hoping he goes 20 and mind you, they were rich in draft capital, 2 first, 2 second, and now that was a big time twist. And ever since I could remember, the Detroit Lions have had trouble at running back. During the Matthew Stafford era, I think Matthew Stafford went 4 seasons without a running back having a 100-yard game. It's just been the curse of Barry Sanders. They haven't been able to get a running back in Detroit. Their running back last year, who was eventually traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm trying to remember his name. It's something Quick or Swift, DeAndre Swift. He was always riddled with injury. Very talented, multifaceted back. He can run, he can catch. Deuce Staley had some interesting comments about him needing to know how to play through injuries. And, Deuce is now in Carolina, and Swift is in Philly, and they've started fresh with all new running backs. Jamal Williams is in New Orleans right now. Montgomery's the new running back from Chicago Bears, and they wanted to get their Thunder and Lightning duo in the backfield. So they go ahead and identified a desperate need. They found their guy at that position, and they went for him. Now, Gibbs was a guy who, if Robinson is projected to go 20, then Gibbs, they were hoping maybe we catch him at the end of the first round, reach that way, or in the second ideally. But because of the new in the moment situation, it's like, look, he's our guy. We only have a handful of guys that we even feel are that fit the system, what we're doing in terms of personality, and actually have the skill set. We're gonna go after him. And the same thing could be said about them going after Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell on paper is a freak. 6'5", 240, phenomenal speed, phenomenal lateral quickness in terms of hip and cone drills. Great covered linebacker for a guy his size. Forget his size. As a linebacker, in his as a linebacker, he can cover. And then when you pair him the fact, wait, he's 6'5", 240 covering like that, it's like, So I didn't know what the problem was, but for whatever reason, he wasn't that much hype. Some are saying it's because of the position he plays. Linebackers are not traditionally going that high anymore. Same thing with running back. They drafted 2 positions that are traditionally not going that high in the draft, unless they are like surefire, like Will Anderson out of Alabama. So why I'm bringing this up is because the new dynamic that's going on in these drafts where teams are identifying their needs and they're taking them early. I just want to tell people, like, Brock Purdy was the last player taken. There was quarterbacks that were taken in the first round, and in fact, teams gave up a king ransom to move up to get him. We've seen this every year. You think now, after the run that he had on an 8-game window, going undefeated until the Super Bowl, then the injury happened. You don't think that 8-game window will be better than a lot of those quarterbacks in that draft will ever have played. And like, don't even get me started on quarterbacks that may have went in the third or the fourth. I'm just talking about in that first round. He's going to have actually a better career. That 8 games alone will automatically make him catapulted right now as the standard at that quarterback class last year, the year before. And you're telling me, if you now look back on it, you care if he went if the Niners drafted him in the first round, would they, after what he did last year, do you think it would have mattered? Do you think it really would have taken away from it at all? If you hope that's what you're getting in the first round, 7-0, in your first 7 starts you don't lose. I'm sorry, Brad Holmes is creating a new tradition, and I expect to see this more. Be on the lookout with more franchises, not just in football and basketball and baseball, where we are building a certain team and we can only lock in on what we need and what we want, and we don't care what's going on. Get ready for a new world. Understand that anytime you challenge the status quo, this is what's going to happen. There's been a certain tradition, a certain format, and this year Brad Holmes in Detroit has challenged it. And so, as weary as it is, don't be surprised when the Detroit Lions become the NFL darlings this year and surprise a lot of folks. Or it's not, they're getting their just due. Now you're hearing got big name marquee free agents on the market. Oh, DeAndre Hopkins might be interested in going to Detroit. You're hearing all the big names, at least make their rounds to Detroit. Now, I don't think he may have had a visit yet, but obviously every fan in America has mentioned, if you go in the comment section, Detroit, Detroit, Detroit. You don't hear these things in the past. People are not volunteering their names when marquee free agents became available. But I think Brad Holmes is onto something, and I think he just started a whirlwind of a new draft process in a new world where teams go after what they want and say, hey, I don't care what the hype machine says. It's my job on the line. This is my regime, and we're going to do whatever we feel like is the most appropriate in that moment. Stay tuned. Global Utopia, Draft Dynamics. Over and out.